Of death.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good fun. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's only 3 pages, so I won't keep you waiting to stay for a while. Yeah, maybe not that one.
Well, I think if you want to, we'll get started. If is that ready to go? Or is it going now?
Okay, you look a fool now at the start, aren't you?
Okay.
Is it on?
Is it going on the video?
We'll cut it down.
We'll cut that bit. Okay. We'll edit that bit out. That's right. Right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank Sam Holland for coming along this evening to talk about her novel, The Echo Man, which is here. It's just published, just out. It's going to be very exciting. And we're going to have a bit of conversation about it, and we'll expect audience participation at a certain point. So get ready to ask insightful and interesting questions, which I'm sure you will. I thought we'd start by having Sam just reading the prologue to it, just to give a bit of a taster of it, and then we can dive into talking about the book as much as we can talk about it, because it's one of those books that there's lots of twists and turns, and we don't want to give any of them away.
Yeah.
Yes, we won't.
It's a difficult one to talk about. Yeah. Shall I just
Please.
kick off?
Oh, please.
Okay. Leaves crunch underfoot. The black closes around him. He exists only in the narrow tunnel of light from the car's headlights. He takes a deep breath in. The forest smells of wet foliage, mud, clear, crisp air. So far it has been as good as he imagined it would be. It's all coming together perfectly. He's holding a woman, one arm hooked around her knees, the other around her back. She's still fresh, and blood runs out of the stab wounds down his white plastic trousers. He savours the warmth on his cold hands. He looks at her fondly for a moment, then heaves her into the boot. She lands with a heavy thud against the second body, her leg lolling out over the bumper. He pushes it inside. Everything has to be just right. He looks at them both, then leans down and undoes the handcuffs. Even in the darkness, he can see the faint red and black marks on her wrist, made while she still had a body responsive enough to bruise. He's pleased. It'll show what he did. He walks back to the front of the car, opening the passenger side door. He picks up the 2 implements left in the footwell, taking the cover off one of them. The stainless steel blade of the knife shines, clean and newly sharpened. It's his favourite. He knows it works best for instances like this, smaller and more precise than the one he uses to kill. He takes both instruments back to the bodies, stops, looks at the girls. He's never done this out in the open before, in the dark. He doesn't like to be rushed, but needs must. He grabs an arm and tugs her half out of the car boot. He straddles her body, taking a good handful of hair. Blood flows, but he knows what he's doing. It doesn't interfere with his process. He changes position, pulling the body around so he can get access to the other side. Then he puts the knife down and picks up the other tool. It's bigger, heavier. The weight is reassuring. He does what he needs to do, and then, with a final twist and pull, it's finished. He stands up, rearranges the bodies, and repeats the action on the second girl. This one is quicker. His technique is better second time round, and after, he pauses, standing back from the car and appraising the scene in the boot. It's not perfect. He sighs. It bothers him that he can't complete the tableau properly this time, that none of this is in the correct order, but he wants these to be found. He shuts the boot. With the heel of his shoe, he smashes out the right tail light. He walks over to the second vehicle, pulling off the plastic clothing, placing it in another bag to burn later. He climbs in and puts his hand on the ignition key, willing the old car to work. As it splutters into life and he drives away, he looks back at the car. From the outside, nobody can tell what lies within. Nobody can imagine what horrors are still to come.
Well, thank you. Well, that gives you a little bit of a taste. So it is somewhat dark.
Somewhat dark.
Somewhat dark, and it's kind of interesting. I think it'd be interesting to talk around that. But the first thing I was going to ask is kind of what inspired you. So sort of I think a question immediately comes to mind is where was the inspiration? I should say initially, in case you hadn't known from the blurbs and what I've said about this before, that the setup in this novel is about a serial killer, and his modus operandi, his thing is recreating the crimes of famous serial killers, which doesn't give too much away. It's
No.
sort of, that's the start of it.
It's pretty much in the start, yeah.
So now, if I could go back and ask you what the inspiration was.
I don't really know. I was watching a lot of films like Seven, Fight Club. I watched Mindhunter. I didn't realise that they're all David Fincher, but they are. And I really like the feel of them. So they're very scratchy, they're very dark. In Seven, you've got sort of the relentless rain. And I really liked the feel of that. And at the same time, I was watching Mindhunter, and I was thinking, in a culture that we exist as we are at the moment, where the serial killer is a bit of a celebrity, is a bit of a, there's a lot made of it. If you were of that nature, wouldn't you want to copy the pioneers as such, the people that have come before you? And if you were a bit narcissistic, had a lot of ego, wouldn't you want to better them? And I guess that's where the idea came from.
So the competitive...
the competitive nature of him in the book.
It's, yeah, I mean, I mean, obviously there's a number of things that struck me about that. I suppose if people bear with me a bit, because it's sort of a bit of a lead up to throwing something out to you, because it set me to thinking about, the novel is also a police procedural novel, so if you're familiar with that sort of thing, the main character is a woman DCI, and she's tasked with finding the serial killer. But there's three ways which those sort of novels move forward and engage the narrative, and there's dialogue, and there's action, so when car chases and setups and things like that, and then there's scene description, and you've got all three operating in this. But I noticed what made me think was there was a lot of heavily reliant on scene description in this. That's what that really struck me, and that made me think a bit about how, because he's recreating these crimes, there's a lot of setup, tableau kind of thing. And it made me think about art practice,
right? About
fine artists, and the sort of correlations between this on a couple of levels, not just the sort of setting up a scene, as it were, but also the fact that he's copying these other serial killers, even though it's competitively, he's copying them. And it made me think back in the 1980s, particularly, there was a art practice called appropriation. People like Sherry Levine and Richard Knight and people like that, who basically recreated other artists' work. Basically what they did. So you really couldn't quite tell the difference. So a very conceptual thing. So this all made me think, this sort of, this setup, he's setting up tableaus, as I said, or more like nature more kind of thing. So I was just wondering, in the writing of this, was that part of what you were thinking about doing, that you had to present these sort of things as a visual thing, is that, that he was operating that on that kind of level of presenting?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know anything about fine art. I'll be completely honest.
Artists are all like, want to be serial killers. Basically, I think it's probably what it is.
I don't know. So when I write, I see things very visually. Mm-hmm. So I'm not somebody that I am someone that sees the characters as a person, I guess, and all what they look like and how they move, and I guess I saw a lot of these scenes. So but it's interesting you say that, because I think when I write very, very fast, but what that tends to be is mainly dialogue. So, and the friend described it as a blocking draft, so as you would have in like a screenplay or something like that. So it's mainly the characters moving around and talking to each other and shrugging a lot and nodding a lot and turning and looking and opening doors and closing doors. So it's mainly that, and then I sort of put the other stuff in later. But I guess with this, because the descriptions had to be so accurate to the serial killers. So one of the first ones is the Manson sort of, and it had to resemble it because that's the first time they realise. But yeah, I guess I don't think it's particularly deliberate. I think that's just the way I write.
I just noticed that, and I thought, well, that was kind of, I hadn't really thought about that in the past. And I was thinking, well, you know, this is actually how someone might approach an art practice. I mean, you think of people like Marcel Duchamp, who was an influence on a lot of the people, this conceptual thing anyway. And his last piece was something very voyeuristic. It's like these sort of rough doors, and you have like 2 holes you peer through, and what you see is a scene of a naked body out in the field, sprawled. You can't see her head, just her torso, and there's a certain amount of ambivalence about what the scene is, but it could very well be a crime scene. That could be a body sprawled out in death. So it doesn't have that. It's definitely voyeuristic. It definitely has a sort of creepy feel to it, and enough people would see that as, or you're peering at some violence has been done, or something is that way. So I started thinking about, because he's presenting these crimes, you know, he's arranging them as to be found and to be, you know,
he definitely wants them
seen,
to be found and to be recognised and to be as the, I mean, that thing in the prologue is definitely him starting. In his head, that's the first time he wants to be recognised, because as you go through the story and as you sort of learn more, you realise that he's been preparing for this moment for a long time. So yeah, he definitely wants to be recognised for the creator he is, I guess. Do you want to call it that?
Well, just just my, again, thinking about it. I mean, it's something that relates to a lot of artists. I mean, it's even more recent, like, like the Chapman brothers who do more like sculpture, but they recreate Goya's war etchings, and they make them actual kind of things. So it's all a bit. But anyway, we can move on from that.
I don't know anything. You take me straight down a hole I know nothing about.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, it just was, again, sort of thing, but. The other thing, of course, that feeds into what those people, some of those artists do as art practice, is there's a perennial fascination we have with evil. And so, I mean, there's a lot more of it in literature, certainly.
In novels, certainly.
Yeah. Well, in nonfiction as well, too, because as you said from the TV program, but those are backed up by a lot of true crime books as well, too, and go back to Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which kind of kicked it off a bit, and it's carried on from that. And so we do seem to have a sort of fascination with it, which obviously you share.
Indeed.
I mean, you could sort of ask where, what's led you to that point, other than the fact you were watching a lot of the television. But whether there was anything else that led into that.
I mean, there's a number of theories on why we are. True crime is huge. I mean, it's everywhere at the moment. It's all over Netflix. It's I think I did a bit of a search for an article I was writing. It was something like this, like 40 true crime documentaries on Netflix at the moment, and that's just Netflix at the moment. And there are a number of theories as to why we like watching it and reading about it. I mean, John Douglas, who's the Mindhunter guy, so he's the one of the fathers of modern profiling. He talked about it as sort of it's a story in itself. So it has villains, it has heroes, and more often than not, it has an ending. So we find out what happens at the end. So we like that surety of knowing what's happened.
There's a resolution. There's
whether
justice is done or not, there's at least a return to some sort of a sense of trying to return to normalcy.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. David Wilson talked about a protective frame. So when we watch it, we get all the emotions associated with it, but we know we're safe. So we're sitting at home, but we can feel the fear, we can feel the anger, we can feel the horror, but we know we have this protective frame and we know that we're safe. So there's all number of theories. I think personally, I'm drawn to it because of the complexity of it. I mean, it's not just black and white. It's not just good and evil. and hopefully it sort of shows a bit in that these killers come from somewhere. They start out life as a child. I don't think, well, I'll contradict myself in a minute, but I think to a large part killers are made rather than born. I don't think they're born evil. I think they're born with a predilection for evil, or they can be. There's certain scans that people have done of the brain that shows different areas that make somebody more prone to be a psychopath. Things like impulsivity and lack of emotion. But if those people grow up in a safe and happy environment, they are less likely to kill and actually, express those urges in a sociopathic way.
Go on to be captains of industry.
Yes, yeah. They become CEOs, they become presidents,
politicians,
they become all of that side. I mean, there's a fascinating book by a guy called James Fallon, and he is a neuroscientist, and he was doing a study, or taking part in a study, where he was doing brain scans of serial killers' brains. So he was doing all of those, and then at the same time he took part in an Alzheimer's study. So he had a scan of his own brain, and he realised that the same traits that were in the serial killers was in his own mind. And this book is about exploring his psychopathic, he calls it psychopath light, but actually when you read it you think, maybe not, mate. But he grew up, his understanding is he grew up in a nice environment. He had a happy childhood, and although he expresses some of those traits in a not very pleasant way for the people around him, he doesn't go on and kill. It's a really interesting book.
It's an interesting thing to look at him recognizing that sort of thing perhaps in himself, because it's certainly, I mean, you can trace it back pretty far, but it's certainly more to the fore now that the protagonists in these, the good guys, very often have as many issues as the bad guys, as the villains. As I like to tell people when I'm talking about these things, it's the hero with issues trying to catch the villain with bigger issues. But there's always a sense that it's damaged people also as the protagonist finding, and there's a sort of two sides of a coin kind of thing. And again, you could trace that. You could even go back to Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, and when Conan Doyle tried to kill them off, he had them locked in their brace going over the Rickenbach Falls, so they, like the two halves of had found each other kind of thing. But it is a much more of a modern thing. I mean, were you, because your woman DCI doesn't have particularly a lot of issues. It's more another character, her brother.
Her brother does, yeah.
And certainly the other female protagonist in there has got big issues.
Yes.
So is that, are you conscious of that when you started thinking, I need to have a sort of a lot of light and dark on both sides of the equation? And
yeah, I mean, it's a very well-worn trope, the detective with a past. But in a way, I think it's because it's so interesting, because you couldn't have just a whole lot of well-adjusted, happy people going investigating. It's just not interesting. It's just not fun. Yeah. And as you say, I think Kara in this she's pretty well-adjusted. The only issue she has is because she's a murder detective and she's investigating a serial killer, which obviously is not a great thing to be doing. So she's
well, and it's complicated by her brother.
And it's complicated by her brother. But actually, I think the complications in Griffin aren't because he's got the same childhood as Kara. I don't think he is actually as damaged as he thinks he is.
We can say a little bit without giving too much away that the character we're talking about, the DCI's brother, is also a policeman. He's not. He's on.
He's been suspended.
He's been suspended, but there's reasons for that, which we won't go into because then it gets into too many plot twists. But he's physically damaged as well as emotionally and mentally damaged by what's happened, and he's a bit of a loose cannon, and he sort of provides a lot of momentum.
Yeah, but I think the dark, damaged detective, I mean, they're everywhere, aren't they? I mean, every single one you look at, I think, has trying to think of all the other ones, but
I can only speak of dark damaged booksellers.
Well, yeah.
It's like,
well, I mean, they'd be interesting too. But they don't investigate murders.
No, they wouldn't. I'm sure there's a Waterstones colleague somewhere right now writing a novel where there's a bookseller who solves the crime or whatever, and
but I
you
think
can guarantee it.
As much as I think in real life as well, you have a lot of people that are, I mean, damaged is probably a bit over the top, but have issues. But equally, I think in this book shows you have a lot of people that are also trying to save them. So there's that nice balance between, I mean, it's good and evil again, isn't it? Yeah. But it's not. I don't think it's ever as easy as he's good, he's evil.
No, I mean it's being more real in a sense. I mean, it's obviously everything is amplified, but I'm sure it does grow out. I mean, you know, people obviously, you only have to look at the papers to see what police and detectives sometimes get up to, you know, and so I mean, it does reflect society a bit in that way as well too. It, as I said, it's difficult to talk around too much about the novel because it's full of twists and turns. And we'd like you to enjoy it, not have it be ruined for you. But it's as these things are wont, and I think you've done a very good job. It's highly plotted, and you said before that you sort of see the characters and you see the dialogue and you get from A to B. So how much of in writing? How much of this have you plotted? Did you plot out? Did you have like a flow chart, or did you have you know, I have to get them, this is the point I have to get them to, and that kind of thing, or is it?
I think I saw certain scenes. So chapter 1, which we didn't read, but is a very distinctive scene, and I saw that because that's very much Jess, and I think I saw Jess and what she's doing in that scene, and that gave me a very strong picture of who she was. And then there was another scene that I sort of saw in my head, which is Griffin standing in the rain, in the mud, at a crime scene, just in black, basically. So I see those sort of images, and then I usually know where the turns are in the book. So where, you know, the part 1 turns and where the midpoint reversal is, and all that. And I had a pretty good idea of what the ending would be, and I knew there was a fire at the beginning. I don't know why I was so clear, but I wanted the house on fire. And then I just sort of write. And I write very fast, so sort of like 5,000-6,000 words in a day, but it's not great, you know, it's not good words, it's basically crap. And then I go back once I have that, and then I plot it all out. So I have index cards, so each chapter is a different point of view, and then I use each colour for each point of view, and then plot it, and I have little post-its, which are the clues essentially. And then I plot it, and then I rewrite according to that. So then you
excise the bits. So
then I just clean up the absolute mess.
I mean, do you ever find it difficult that you say you write a lot, like 5,000 or 6,000 words, which is a lot of words, and you say most of it's just spewing out, as it were. But I mean, I would expect that within that you'll have little nuggets. Is there ever times where you have to sort of readjust things to save the little nugget?
Yeah,
you know, I can't lose that, but how am I going to make it work?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes out. The characters sort of have their own. I mean, it's really kind of a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but sort of wanky to say. But the characters do sort of have their own lead, and they sort of take it where they want to take it. And actually, I wrote the whole. I don't want to give too much away, but I wrote the whole book, got to the epilogue, and then started to write the epilogue. And it was that point that I realised actually who it was, and then had to go back and obviously rewrite the whole thing in line with that. So
that was a discovery you made?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, literally I'd written the whole thing, and I knew it's really hard to describe.
Well, hard to talk about without, you know, but as you would expect in novels, there's a lot of red herrings and flips and turns and things like that. So.
And I knew who it wouldn't be, if you see what I mean. So I knew who the red herring would be, and I kind of had a couple of scenes in my head that I wanted to go with, and then rewrite according to the plan, basically, and make it make sense. I think the serial killer bit was difficult because I wanted serial killers that had very distinctive MOs that were very different. So I had my whiteboard at one point had lists of serial killers and how they killed and who they killed. So did they kill men or women? Because I wanted a mix as well. I didn't want it all to be women, although that's quite hard to do because serial killers tend to gravitate towards women. But,
women or gay men.
Yeah, there's five groups: the elderly, children, gay men, women, and runaways, the homeless.
So
the most vulnerable people in society, basically.
Yeah, and it's usually men. I think there's a few exceptions. I mean, a lot of the women that you can think about, you know, like Rose, and
they're with men. Yeah,
it's usually following a male lead that they get caught up in the male protagonist
there's
world.
very few female. I think it's Wernos. She's probably the only.
Well, I was to say the one in Florida, and she preyed upon straight men. You know, which is unusual because it's usually people that are much more vulnerable.
Yeah, she was very unusual. So so I had big lists of serial killers on a whiteboard.
I mean, was this out in public view?
It was actually, because it was right in the middle of COVID, so my husband was doing video calls with a list of serial killers behind him on the whiteboard. So he had to say, it kind of said, "Where's my wife?" and then he had to explain a little bit further and just ignore the serial killers. It's fine.
Just sleep with one eye open.
Yeah.
And, so start talking about how, you know.
This is my wife's office.
Start talking about, we need a new patio in the garden is always a bit worrying.
And the other goes missing.
Yeah. Oh, he's gone to visit.
He's gone away.
He's gone away.
Traveling.
Yeah. No. It's. I mean, you're making it something that's art. So I mean, you live with that, and I suppose like anything else, you compartmentalize it and separate it out and things like that. I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I quickly learned not to read research books before bed. So I had to read them. Had to have a gap, otherwise it wasn't. It wasn't good.
You're hearing every little creak in there.
Yeah, that's good.
I think it's interesting too because you've said it. I didn't feel like it was that necessarily site specific, but it is, just for your interest, it is set in Hampshire and Portsmouth, but it's not.
It's not explicit about it. All the locations are made up, but every now and again you do have to say Hampshire Constabulary, so you have to stick a name.
Portsmouth, so you know.
Is it Portsmouth? We'll talk about Portsmouth.
I think, isn't it something in there? So where did I see I saw somewhere I saw a reference to Portsmouth. Maybe it wasn't actually in the novel. Maybe it was something when I was doing the research. I'm not sure why that's.
That works.
Or maybe I just think this is the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that would go on in Portsmouth.
Go on in Portsmouth. Yeah, so clearly not Winchester.
You know what they're like there.
Clearly not. But it's somewhere that's got an urban and very rural areas as well. So it couldn't have been London. It couldn't have been. Also, I live here, so it's easy.
Yeah, right. What you know.
Well, yeah.
It's but again, I didn't sense that. I mean, the setting could have been anywhere, kind of thing. As you said, there was urban with rural access to rural landowners. It wasn't the middle of Birmingham, so at the end of this, you get the sense that there could be more. So is there any plans to carry on with DCI, Cara Elliott's career?
Yeah, I'd like to. So there is a second book, but it's not, and it's in the same world. In that some of the, so if you sort of imagine Marvel and DC, it's the same sort of world. So the like the forensic pathologist is the same. The detective superintendent is the same guy. So it's Marsh, and but it's completely standalone. It's a completely separate cast of characters. But Cara does make a sort of cameo because they ask the question, could this be the Echo Man? And she kind of comes in and says no.
Well, Tara French had quite a long run with her Dublin Murder. I was familiar with that Dublin Murder Squad novels, where each outing was a different detective within the squad. So the other ones kept making appearances. So I mean, certainly that would work that way.
And I'd like to
sorry to bring in other authors.
No, it's fine. I haven't read any of hers. I watched it though. I watched.
They conflated the first two novels, The End of the Woods, and the second one. And books are always better, except when they do a film from this, in which case
it'd be excellent. Yeah. But there's another Dark Damaged. I mean, what's his name? Rob in that. Rob.
Oh yeah.
I've forgotten his second name, but yeah, he's another Dark Damaged.
Yeah.
Rob.
Oh yeah.
You can't write. But then I think cops are to a good extent because of the nature of their job. I think they experience.
Well, it's. There's two things. Yeah, I mean, there's two things. One, there's always there's a redemptive part of it, and then there's also the having to venture in on our behalf, venture into the dark underworld. So the hero, the Beowulf going to fight Grendel, has to go into the cave where Grendel's awful mother is and all the rest of that. And so the hero has to make that descent into that underworld on our behalf, to keep Grendel from coming to the mead hall and slaughtering us all. There we go. I think it's like, this is like being at university, isn't it? Except I don't know what I'm talking about. But so there's that quality that you want a hero who has to overcome his own things on that journey.
Yeah, you want that character arc. You don't want them just to be same as when they started and when they finished. You want them to have experienced some sort of journey and some sort of discovery of themselves, I guess. Not to be too trite, but yeah.
So you've done that in this, and I quite enjoyed it. But as I said, there's some eye-watering bits in it. So just prepared. But it's well done, I thought. So, I mean, we could talk a bit more about your writing experience. I mean, we could talk a bit more about what brought you to writing. Actually, is that something that you always wanted to do? Were you a child who wrote stories and?
I think so. I think I always wanted to be a writer, but I don't think I thought that it was something that you could do as a job. It wasn't a proper job. Like, you go to the careers days and they don't say you can be an author and make lots of money because
you don't.
Yeah, you really don't. But I always wrote. Although I did all science at A level, I went on and did a psychology degree, which is science, and then I went off and did like 15 years in HR. But at the same time, I think that curiosity and that want, you always have the stories in your head, I think. And at one point, I think it just overrode any self-consciousness I had about it, or any lack of confidence. I think I just overrode that want to actually get it on the page, and then I just sort of just did and just got on with it.
Well, I could see where the degree in psychiatry, obviously, have the background for this, but also 15 years in HR. I mean, there's, I'm sure, lots of stories there. I mean, well, I mean, very often HR is involved with conflict resolution and having to deal with people's quirks and foibles and
egos,
issues and things like that. So I'm sure there's lots of material to be gathered there.
Yes, there's certainly a few characters. Yeah.
And so the things, so the interest in the true crime thing just came about because you sort of stumbled across that and said, oh, I think this is fascinating. Or was there things in your psychiatry courses at uni that?
No, I mean, I did no criminology at all. It was mainly about things like the structure of the brain, perception. We did a tiny bit of social psychology. We did a tiny bit of, but we did no criminology at all. So, but it was useful in that it helped me read scientific papers. It helped me sort of have a look at things and find out what interests me, really. And I guess, I just started reading, and then I just got really interested, and then just read everything, basically. So in terms of profiling and the sort of criminology side, you've got all the US guys, so John Douglas and Robert Resler are the sort of main ones, and then there's an English guy called Paul Britton, and then David Wilson, as I mentioned before.
Paul Britton, was that talking with serial killers?
He's the Jigsaw Man, and there's no
that's
one.
right.
He's the English equivalent, I guess. He's very good, and David Wilson's very good. You get some that aren't, but you get a lot that are really good. I'm
just envisioning the inevitable conferences, the serial killer conference. Kind of thing,
oh God! Hopefully not. No. Hopefully we won't get to that point.
Well, as I say, I've got more questions, but I thought maybe at this point we could open up to you lot out there. And anybody have anything they wanted to ask Sam?
Did you find there's a lot of things that are based in science or fact with what's fiction, what you've written is fiction. So, you mentioned Manson and sort of following that, following different cases of serial killers, and then obviously police have to act in a certain way, or you know, there's certain procedures, isn't there? Did you find it quite difficult with, take it as, you know, there's multiple different types of serial killers. Do you find it quite hard to make it all fit and work within that?
I think it would have been hard to fit with police procedure if I think they'd had a chance to take a breath, but it moves on so quickly that my agent described it as a sort of treasure hunt of death. So they're literally just following clues. They don't have much of a chance to actually do much murder investigation because they're just trying desperately to follow
I think
it.
the time span in the book is about a week or
It's about
two?
it's 10 days, yeah.
10
it's
days,
like,
yeah,
or 11 days.
yeah,
So it's very, very quick. There's not a lot of. I mean, the police. I have a cop friend who sort of helps me with the police procedure, and I try to keep it as much in the truth as you can. But then when you're dealing with something like this, it's just not realistic.
It plays to the interest of the book as well, doesn't it? Because like you said, if it was all very convenient in regards to, or very, like if they didn't have a slightly broken side to them, the police officers, if it was all very, it would almost be boring on that side.
Yeah,
of the story,
they'd be waiting weeks and weeks for DNA to come back. They'd be waiting weeks for
of
fingerprints.
course.
It's all that sort of stuff, and but that's not. And you'd have lots of different forensic pathologists when you just have one. You'd probably have you'd have a huge murder team, and actually the one, I mean, when they talk about it, it does get bigger, but it's not the size that it probably should be.
Considering the you know the body count does get a bit Shakespearean level.
It does get high, yeah. I can't even remember.
Yeah, you didn't keep tick marks on it. Is there any?
Yeah, it's.
That was one of the links to it. I think, you know, you mentioned the interest in true crime, you know, especially on things on Netflix, and I think that's part of it's quite condensed, all of that stuff, because sometimes it's murders that have happened over years or months. You don't have to sit through all of that. They just give you like the highlights, don't they? So it's quite. Yeah. That's quite nice, and if this is condensed down into like a 10-day,
it's ridiculous.
With every serial
condensed.
killer, you know, all these different ones in it, you can see why it's grabbing in the same sort of way.
It's very, very quick. But I mean, things like I'll Be Gone in the Dark is a really good example of a sort of true crime, and that's from Crimes. I mean, he was in the 80s, wasn't he? The GSK. So so it starts sort of in the 80s, and it all follows it through to sort of when they actually got it, and which was fairly. It was 2 years ago. It was when I was writing this, because I had to update it because they got him when I was like, oh no. And they solved a Zodiac cipher while I was still writing it, and I was like, I had to update it. I was like, can you stop solving stuff just for a minute so I can just get this published, and then
it won't matter.
And then it won't matter. But yeah, something like I'll Be Gone in the Dark does it really well. I think it's a really good sort of true crime. Very sad as well.
I'm so interested in the fact that you didn't know quite who did it right up until the end of. And it sounds as though your first draft is kind of planning, really. Is it kind of where you're writing to find out?
I mean, some people talk about writing very long. Like a very long synopsis, and it is sort of like a very because that first draft is usually about sort of 60,000 words, which is obviously very, very short.
Yes.
So I never have the problem of having to cut. Well, I do cut down, but having to trim, I always have to sort of fill out. But yeah, I didn't.
Have you had that experience before with other things that you've written, or is that sort of a common experience for you?
I'm trying to think. The second one, I must admit, when I was writing the second one that comes out next year, I killed so many people, I had nobody left who could have actually done the crime. I was like, everybody's dead, there's nobody left who could actually, and so then I had to go back and have a look at it. So often, no, I don't know. I know who it is in terms of their type, their psychology, and then once I've worked out who the character is, then I have to go back and sort of make them fit, but often that's quite easy because you don't want to make it too obvious.
Yeah.
So,
and I would imagine with sort of not knowing yourself or keeping that kind of, it gives it an edge, and it means that hopefully the readers then are not going to be, they're going to be very surprised as well. In that sense of, if you're not sure until quite late on in that process.
I've had a lot of people feedback about the ending that it takes them by surprise, that it is, you think, without saying too
Well,
much.
I was so surprised by that same thing. I almost wondered if I misunderstood. How could she possibly not know who the killer was? I just was like, wow.
It's fascinating.
But I knew the type, because interspersed in the sort of story are sort of reports about his childhood and about how he was growing up, obviously without using the right name. So a kind of sort of newspaper reports, and there's a psychologist report,
social service reports.
Social services report.
That's interspersed.
So you get an idea of what's happened to him as he's grown up.
Yeah.
But who it actually is, you don't find out until.
But I suppose he's not in the social circle of the other characters.
I can't say. Maybe.
What makes it easier? What would make that possible? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I forgot to mention that there is you are given information all along. There's sort of a bit of a teaser, in a way. So it sort of, not that it leads you down the wrong path, but you start thinking about, well, which of the characters is going to fit that profile. You know, are any of the characters we've been introduced to exhibiting the kind of behavior that kind of childhood would lead you to. But you know, it's the end. The end is still a surprise.
But I guess it's that second draft, exactly as you describe it, where the plotting happens. But you know, it's sort of like you've worked it out, and then you've got to go back and say, okay, if that's the point I've got to at the end, then what? Yeah, what do I need to feed in? What do I need to, you know? And it's just. And so the second draft for you is very much doing all of that, as you say, with your colour coding,
the colour
and all
coding,
of that,
the post-its and the whiteboard, and the
yeah. And when you
absolutely.
get to the end of that process, so it's like, now here's the structure and everything is kind of in the place.
Yeah.
How much more drafting do you do after that?
So there's normally another 2 after that. So that when everything's in the right place, then I normally go through and. I don't know how to describe it, but it's putting in the things that have been missed, making sure it does work, and then going through and taking out all the rubbish that you like. A lot of people shrug, mutter, very, you know, very. In fact, lots of people say the hell, and what on earth. So I have to literally do a find and replace and go through and find them all and take them all out. And then the very last one is a read aloud, and making sure that it sounds nice, like that doesn't sound wrong.
So you get to that stage, and then what's the edit? How do you work with editors? Do you find the editors are coming back and sort of really digging into plot, or is it really finessing at that stage when you start working with
it's normally stuff that I've completely missed, so maybe that's not clear, or why is so doing that, and in my head I know why they're doing that, but I've obviously not read it right on the page. So a bit of that. I'm trying to think what she pulled out of Eckermann. Most of it's things like motivations and continuity. I'm generally not too bad on, mainly because it's so short. There's little that can go wrong in 10 days, but yeah, it's mainly stuff like motivations and making sure that's clear, but generally the structure's okay. Actually, I'm quite lucky that structurally I haven't had to do much in terms of pulling them apart.
It makes sense with your visual approach, where you're saying like it seems like you almost watch it happen, and then you use the same, you know, there's a lot of the same language used. It's almost like you've written it from the perspective of that penultimate draft. It's almost like you've written it from the perspective of you reacting to it. If you say what the hell a lot, I don't know if you do. Probably. Maybe that's your reaction. Like, oh, he's done this, crikey, you know. And then you enter it in as the character's
it's
perception.
It's not so much crikey in
there. Crikey Moses.
It's a bit more WTF and that sort of thing.
The F word count is quite high.
Yeah, but that's how people and
that's how cops talk.
How cops, and also, I mean, anybody who's confronted with what's been left for them to find, that would be the language you would use. I mean, it would definitely elicit a strong response to people. So, any more questions? So I was going to ask what you were reading now, if that gives us any more clues about
Yeah,
what your interests are.
Well,
But
it's a bit atypical at the moment because I'm going to Crime Fest in a couple of weeks.
okay,
Well, that's
Crime
not
Fest.
Crime Fest, yeah, it's in Bristol. It's a big
Yeah, no,
crime writers festival,
Yeah.
basically, and I'm moderating one of the panels there. So I've had to read Russ Thomas, and it's about police procedurals. So I've done nothing but read police procedurals. So Russ Thomas is Adam Tyler, again another dark damage detective. What's his name? Thomas Enger. He's a Norwegian. He
Okay.
writes with another Norwegian guy called Horst. I read all his.
I'm not sure if I quite picked it. But sorry, I mean,
Yeah.
there's
So I've read those.
a lot of this out of Scandinavia. I mean, there's long dark winters. I think probably.
Yeah, it's good.
Lead
They're
one to
both
Thoughts and
really
Murder.
good in terms of those series. I'm trying to think who else I've been reading recently. Oh God, mainly police procedurals. Because I'm at Harrogate, so I'm trying to read the books of the people that are going to be on the same panel as me. So Claire McGowan and Brian McGilloway. So they're both Northern Irish. They're very good as well, which I never read before. So it's just a way. I mean, it's been a really good way to read new stuff, but equally they're all police procedurals. So it's like would like to read something that isn't a police procedural.
Maybe some rom-com or something.
Yeah, well, I
don't
do
know.
like a bit of variety, but at the moment I've just read, all of that.
Okay.
which isn't normally what I read.
But I mean, I do like the idea of Crime Fest. I mean,
Crime
just-
Fest, yeah.
You know, just knock over a couple of convenience stores on your way, you know, and
Yes.
it's,
Yeah.
of course, they don't really have convenience stores in this country. There's a decided lack of
It's a corner
them
shop,
to-
isn't it? Is the
sorry?
equivalent. It's like a corner shop is the
the
equivalent.
corner shop.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
it's not
they
quite the
really
same
exist
thing as
anymore, yeah.
not quite the same thing as robbing a convenience store. I mean, it's
It's just a whole load of crime writers, basically. Getting drunk over the course of about 4 days. It's a lovely time.
as you do. Yeah, actually, I suppose much missed. I mean, your book reminded me a good deal of the late Mo Hader.
Yes, I've just started. I read one of hers, and then this year my quest is to read them all. So I read.
Birdman was her first.
Yeah, I read Birdman, and I just read The Treatment, and that my goodness, that's dark.
She's dark, yeah. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mo Hader, who's just recently passed away, but yeah, there's no happy endings. There's nobody. Who's it? Cafferty?
Another dark dessert.
Yeah, he's got issues.
He's got issues.
But it's and I remember reading them and thinking that there's sort of, I mean, it's not a gender thing, but there is a certain amount of women writing this kind of thing now. Don't know, men sort of go in for it as well too, but there does seem to be a lot of women who sort of are drawn to this sort of dark kind of crime. I don't know whether to read anything into that at all. It sounds like very thin ice kind of comment I just made there.
I wouldn't like to speculate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's partly the same thing as I was talking about earlier, that women like to maybe write and read about them because they have experienced a level of fear to some extent in their lives just walking to a car park.
Yeah.
So actually to read about it in a safe environment where cops are good and there's usually a happy ending.
There's some sort of therapeutic or
maybe.
Because I have to think, as you know, it's always difficult talking about gender things, but as a man, and I'm not, I'm no Jack Reacher. No, I've met Lee Child, and I think I could take him, but I do inhabit the world in a lot more confident way, I would expect, than women do, or other people who might be seen as a victim. I mean, I think as most men, you project a certain amount of competence and authority in where you are. Not necessarily in the wrong part of town. You might be nervous, but walking around, I'm sure it's got to be a much different experience for women, and for, again, other people who would, be picked out as possible victims, just simply by gender or age or infirmity or their manner, as if you come across as effeminate as a man or something like that, you might it might be a flag saying,
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to stop there
Yeah,
because
moving away.
I'm just.
Can I ask a question about the kind of the market and the kind of commercial nature of it, and to what extent? Because you've been talking about it as a police procedural, you know. Obviously, I know what that is, but for you as a writer, to what extent are you thinking about, you know, that early on, and thinking about, you know, particularly as you write more books, and you obviously got to be very aware of all of that as the end. But to what extent are you thinking about that at the start when you devise, for example, a new a new set of characters, or a new you start on a new project, and is that helpful? Is it constraining in a way? I don't know. I'm just
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I set out when I first mentioned it to my agent and said I want to write a book about serial killer copying serial killers, he was like, fine. And I did say I want to go I don't want to sanitize it. I don't want it to be a vanilla. I want to go dark. And, you know, if I want to go down that route. And he said, fine. But I think his eye was always on the commercial. So his feedback constantly was, you have to make the hook the thing. So the hook is the serial killer copying serial killers. You have to bring it in early. You have to make it the thing. But certainly when we went out to publishers with that, we had a lot of editors saying we love it, and a lot of sales and marketing people saying we can't touch this. We are not going near this. And